First of all, why did so many of you like this stupid tweet that I made where I was like, oh, if I did a hot takes on Overwatch, I'm going to piss a lot of people off. And apparently everybody in the comments was like, no, now you got to do it. Now you got to talk about it. You know, we love drama stirring. We love spicy hot takes and rage bait. That's what our community is about, Abby. You got to do it. All right. All right, I'ma bless the masses. Abby is here, but as usual, before I dive into this video, I want it to be prefaced with something. Nothing that I will say in this video is meant to be taken overly seriously. It is for fun, okay? There's obviously gonna be some spice, rage bait, and perhaps some truth, sprinkled in here and there. Some of this will be subjected to my opinion. Some of it is things I've seen going around and yada, yada, yada. You guys know how hot takes works. As always, remember, this is for fun. Don't take it overly seriously or as a personal attack. Now, with that being said, let's dive right into my boiling hot Overwatch takes. Let's get started. First of all, I'm going to talk about some general game hot takes, and then we're going to get onto every single character in the game right now. So general game hot take number 1, the game is 10 times easier to play now, and it is infinitely more team deathmatchy than it ever was before. There's a lot more emphasis on individual play, mechanics, and micro gameplay in the current state of Overwatch 2 and quick play ranked, and a lot less emphasis on the macro, which was something that was a lot more important back in Overwatch 1 that made the game a lot more interesting, team-centric, and even gave niche heroes a position within the game to thrive in without being overtuned or fully reworked. So that's hot take number 1. All right, now I'm gonna make some general points about the in-game stuff. First of all, I really hate that from a lore perspective that they have done everything possible to decline that magic does not exist in the universe. This has created a lot of problems from a lot of perspectives, and I think this video is going to be long enough, so I will talk about the magic issue in the Overwatch lore in another video, but I'm not a fan of that. Second of all, it doesn't matter which ship it is, but Overwatch needs to take some form of it from their narrative that they keep trying to do with the heroes, whether it's the long-forming Genji and Mercy or the stuff that they're trying to do with Baptiste, Lifeweaver, and some other characters. I don't care who you do it for. Pay something off. Overwatch has a problem with just paying off anything in the narrative, and it's becoming frustrating because this game is 10 years almost into its own lore and nothing has been paid off, right? Next hot take that I'm gonna make is that the game is over-evolving and hopes to generate new audiences and retain some old ones by constantly adding new ways to play the game, or a character, and whilst what they're not realizing in the process is that it might be creating a lot of unnecessary bloat in the game, and it is going to lead into new problems with balance, and sometimes less is more, and Overwatch should realize this, and not everything needs to be overly complex or a vomit of passives to be interesting. Right, now moving on to the next hot take, the game now objectively doesn't require as much skill as it once did back in Overwatch 1. A lot of heroes have been dumbed down and simplified in hopes to be easier to play, so it's easier for newer audiences to pick it up, but it's led to a lot of interesting elements of characters being lost with it over time. Prime examples are some of the texts on Doomfist, Sombra, Mercy have been lost in hopes to achieve an easier to play character so that you can like the newer audiences can pick them up better, or in some cases like Sombra, they're just a problem for balance in general that we'll talk about later. And that's just some of the things I've noticed over time. Another hot take is that trying to balance for all 3 different modes, 5v5, 6v6, and Stadium, by using the basic 5v5 balance as the overall medium is incredibly lazy, as the Stadium team has to then mostly work around with powers and items rather than address the direct issues that may arise within the game mode itself. And similarly, 6v6 as a mode is failing, not because the mode is bad, but because it's barely given any time and attention, and almost feels like it was just an effort to tone down a community uproar upon the format war that was happening. Next up, on that final note for general gameplay points as of right now that I can think of and in my notes over here, is that 5v5 or 6v6, to me personally, it doesn't matter anymore. Overwatch needs to just grow a pair and commit to one route and balance accordingly. Trying to make a game for everybody will just lead to a game for nobody. If we stay in 5v5, in my opinion, super kaiju tanks need to be nerfed, as they're just unhealthy for the gameplay loop. If you're so obsessed with one player having an impact of a player that's worth 2 to 3, then you might as well just commit to 6v6. Again, my own personal hot take. Now moving on to the hero notes. Again, we'll be talking about some of these things from a lore POV, some of these things from a game balance POV, yada yada yada. Starting us off, we're going to be going through the tank role. First of all is D.Va. D.Va, it's unbelievably stupid to me that D.Va has incredible depth as a character that gets barely explored in her cinematic and hinted at in her stories and some very, very few voice lines. But Blizzard not once in 10 years has decided to directly dive into D.Va as a character and actually explore the depth that comes with the trauma that she's gone through and all sorts of other things, because I think Hannah Song is just an absolutely incredible character and a very inspiring character. Anybody that kept up with like the impact D.Va had as a cultural phenomenon, even in South Korea back in the early Overwatch 1 days, you would know how much she meant to a lot of people, and to me, and a lot of the girls that I know personally, she's an absolutely incredible character. And you know, while having the little meme persona is nice, it would be nice if we could see a little bit more of Hannah Song and a lot less of D.Va sometimes, especially since the game is maturing and now that she's in a position in war again, I would really like to see that other side of her a lot more going forward, so we can see how just cool of a character she can be. Number 2 is Doomfist. Doomfist as a tank is 10 times easier to play, and I'm going to keep it honest with you, he's mind-numbingly boring to play compared to what DPS Doomfist had to offer. His gameplay loop over time in Overwatch 2 has become more about being slower with your approach, surviving, block botting to a softer extent, and just empowered punching anything. Trying to do anything interesting with him is a free kill for the enemy, is usually going to often place yourself in a position where you're feeding. He's a failed rework to me, and he should just return to the DPS role at some point, with the gimmick being less about him landing his punches, rather using his punches to get into a good position where he can then use his hand shotgun to do decent damage. This approach has never been tried in Overwatch 1, and I would at least appreciate it if they tried it in Overwatch 2. Hazard and this tank trend of the role of almost all of them as characters nearly being loud, brash, and obnoxious in some way is getting really boring, and it doesn't help that they're all playing in some form of a brawl playstyle. Although, to be fair to Hazard, in terms of playstyle, leaning into his more aggressive playstyle would be a lot more fun than whatever block slop bot he is right now. Moving on over to the next point I have, to be honest with you, outside of the small characterization issues I mentioned, I don't really have anything bad to say or hot takey to say about JunkerQueen. I think she's kinda aight. Mauga is the worst design tank in this game history, and I cannot believe he made it past the testing phase. Even back in the day, there was a question that was asked that, hey, do you want more tank busting tanks? And they responded that, yeah, we don't see a problem with a tank buster in the tank role. And that is just a horrendous design choice, especially when back in the day, the tank role didn't get gigabuffed to where it is right now, and it was struggling with some of the design problems that ran into with going to 5v5, and he's just a monster of a tank that's basically just a walking stat stick, and there's no way to salvage him unless they genuinely rework. He's also just incredibly boring to play, and honestly, no, I'm just gonna deny the stomp does not count as a skill expression. It's the absolute bare minimum that doesn't even require you to rub two brain cells together. I can name 5 tanks from League of Legends, Marvel Rivals, Paladins, and even that stupid Mecha Break game that's better designed tanks than whatever this garbage turned out to be. Anyways, moving on to Orisa as a character, and her journey as a character has actually been very cool. Orisa gameplay wise is actually dog water and embodies the worst of the worst when it comes to tank design, all painted into one. However, I will make the argument that she's 200% salvageable if they actually put in proper effort to making her a lot more of an interesting, engage-based, proactive tank, rather than a passive, turn your brain off, exist and get value type of tank. Ramattra is a very boring villain with an extremely short-sighted and stupid objective, which results in him being exploited by Talon anyway. Top-tier writing as usual by the writing team. This was honestly done just for him to be the midway villain of the first arc of the major Overwatch 2 story before leading into Talon. There was ways to make him a lot more interesting, and also a lot more ways to make it interesting on how he was going to conduct the whole, take over 𝐒𝐈𝐈𝐓𝐄𝐑 and whatever bullshit like 𝐒𝐈𝐈𝐓𝐄𝐑, Null Sector Invasion 2.0 that he had planned. But I'll dig deeper into this in another video, because I actually want to start talking a lot about the lore and the problems with it in the near future. So that's just so far like my little take on Ramattra. Anyone who thinks Reinhardt is dishonest is so lost in how horrible Overwatch 2 has ruined their perception of the tank role and as to how these games are meant to work, that there's no point in even debating with them. Roadhog is a design nightmare, but I still believe is salvageable, but its current iteration is just taking steps in every wrong direction possible that I just cannot believe he is in the state that he's in, and I hope he gets nerfed. 𝐒𝐈𝐈𝐓 is by far the most boring tank to play in 5v5's gameplay loop, but he's actually pretty decently fun in the 6v6 loop, and that has a lot to do with how tanks would trade together in terms of resources. Now, that's just my personal opinion on the state of 𝐒𝐈𝐈𝐓, but he struggles with 5v5 with the mobility crab DPS and supports, and honestly, I just don't want to see him get reworked. And I also just think he's just a very boring tank, and the more and more mobility becomes king in the game, the less and less Sigma becomes viable in 5v5. It's clear that he was made with 6v6 in mind, and he just barely fit into 5v5 before, but now as the game's evolving, he's becoming a lot more awkward, right? So moving on over to the next character, Winston is actually pathetically easy to play and understand, but because majority of this player base lacks the super scientific brain that Winston has, they think the basic concepts of staging a dive, engaging, baiting out resources, escaping, and repeating that cycle equals skill, when that's just how you're meant to play tank in general. Please grow up. Anyways, his ult on the other hand has the highest skill requirement in the game to maximize value, so I guess it kind of balances him out. Ball is actually by far the worst designed character across the entire game. His entire loop revolves around him stripping agency from another player one way or the other, encourages less interaction the longer his loop goes on, and nowadays he has too many ways to mitigate his own mistake and escape. He's also much easier to play now. Please stop copying ball players. And his perks have made him so much of a silly character that he just genuinely is haha funny mobility hero. Funny mobility hero equals skill. Am I right, guys? No, seriously, he's really not that hard to play nowadays. Zarya is not as overpowered as people think she is. Stop shooting her bubbles, but discipline is something the Overwatch community has never learned, so I completely understand that. To account for the time right now, I'm going to cover Hitscan as an overall role, and we'll talk about this a little bit more from the gameplay perspective. Look, I personally don't mind Hitscan that much, and they can be strong, but I do agree that there is a sense of skill that goes into playing them. However, the problem is that when Overwatch decides that Hitscan will also have some form of good sustain or mobility, I feel like there needs to be a middle ground that if a Hitscan is allowed to be strong, they can't be given too much of one thing. They should have just okay-ish sustain or okay-ish mobility to help them reposition or to survive something, but they shouldn't be in a position where it's like, no, it should really help them stand their ground. That's when it's actually really, really bad, right? Bastion actually has one of the coolest character arcs in the entire game that doesn't get enough acknowledgement it deserves from the community. I think he's a pretty cool character. 𝐒𝐿 is actually really boring as a character on the other hand so far in the lore, but I really love her personality and that balances her out. Oh boy, here we go. Genji Mercy is something that I want to talk about for Genji. I hate that we have to dodge this a lot. I don't really have anything hot take to say about the character itself, but I will say that they should seriously pull the trigger on this. And like I said, I'll dig deeper into the lore and all these like shipping problems and everything in a future video. Now moving on to Hanzo. Hanzo is a one-note character who isn't even remotely interesting despite the cool demeanor he has, and his redemption arc was more of an elevation for Kiriko than it was a character growth for him. Seriously, and I seriously mean seriously, I can go on for this for a while, okay? Moving on to the next character, Junkrat is the #1 example of this, so I'm going to talk about it with him specifically, but this constant babying of villains is actually absurd and stupid. Villains can be charming, threatening, stupid, or intelligent, and even funny, but using that as a basis to treat them like they're a child who never did anything wrong, and they shouldn't be quote-unquote hated by the rest of the cast members or community members within the game is so damn stupid. He's a killer. He got exiled or cast off from his own home, and that's literally what makes him cool, because unlike some of the other ones in the Overwatch lore, Junkrat actually managed to achieve something as a bad guy, and that's something as a character that should demand respect for the writing team, for the writing and disdain from other cast members. Mei as a character is just boring, and as a cast member, she serves more purpose as a behind-the-scenes character that helps the people out with gadgets, not necessarily somebody that should ever be on the front line. Specifically, when I remember watching Recall, like the Overwatch 2 cinematic, she has, if I'm not mistaken, pretty much no actual combat experience, and the Overwatch 2 trying to find a moment to help make her shine when Rein and Genji could arguably solo the 𝐒𝐈𝐍𝐿 by themselves. It's just really awkward. Regardless, it is what it is when it comes to Mei. Also, gameplay-wise, she's just an absolute cancer of a character. Reaper is a terribly written character with next to no redeeming qualities and is a walking plot device to ensure events happen in the lore, but he could be so much more if they actually tried. Pharah had the most potential in Overwatch 1 as a character, specifically with how interesting of a comic she had with 𝐒𝐿𝐼𝐻 securities. So obviously in Overwatch 2, they made sure that they stripped her of any unique personality traits whatsoever, made her a Mercy cheerleader, and just tossed her over into Overwatch as a generic soldier when her character arc could have been leading into something so much more about moving on from Overwatch, getting over that past dream, maturing, focusing on 𝐒𝐿𝐼𝐻 and the bigger picture when it comes to Anubis, especially since, if I recall correctly, she watched some of her old teammates die. So I just anything interesting with Pharah has been completely tossed out the window. Symmetra and Torbjorn should never be meta and are both by far the most dishonest characters when it comes to playing the builder class type in a game like this. and they're just horrible and they should just never be strong. Venture is actually hilariously OP right now, but you wouldn't know that because the people just actually suck at the hero. Tracer is actually much easier to play nowadays. She's become easier because of the balance changes, the 5v5 formatting, Season 9 changes. There's a bunch of things I could talk about. However, I will still argue that she still is the highest skill ceiling hero in Overwatch, but most of it completely relies on how you use your blinks and the discipline that comes with them. If you're somebody that just generally has good discipline and understand what blinks are meant to do, not gonna lie, picking up Tracer and kind of even one-tricking her to maybe low GM or high Masters is really not that difficult. I've done it. Moving on to the next character, I have Sombra. Okay, so there is nothing that Blizzard can do to please the Sombra community. I don't even think this is a hot take at this point. It doesn't matter which design route they are going to take this character. Somebody is going to find a way to complain, but I'm going to keep it real with you. I think she's going to be going into the support role, which I don't know how to necessarily feel about, but I also feel that they have tried everything possible with the kit currently from their design ethos perspective or philosophy perspective on how to approach the character, which I still think there's a couple of other things they could try, but we have to wait and see what they do. She's just a mess, and honestly, she's really not even that bad, and arguably speaking, she's really underpowered right now, and it's just really sad to see. Freja, okay, so Freja, if you're bad into the character, if you have a bad like time against this character, genuinely like in the current version of Freja, as I'm speaking like the current live patch, honestly skill issue. If you think Freja lacks character in terms of like, you know, the lore and everything, you are a failure in media literacy and don't understand how she's how she's contributing to a lot of the many different major pieces in the lore. But again, Overwatch sucks at paying anything off, so I can understand why people think Freja doesn't necessarily connect to all these different points in the lore, because again, Overwatch writing is so basic that even the community just fails to understand, oh, Freja is actually playing a big part connecting this piece to this piece, that piece to this piece. It also implies that this is happening with her in the past, yada yada yada. People just don't get that. Freja is a great character. I like her in every way possible, and she's really not that bad from a lot of different perspectives, right? Anyways, so moving on to the next character, I have Ana. Okay, Ana, I don't know, she's all right. I don't really have anything to say about her when it comes to gameplay and lore. She's pretty well done. Baptiste and Mauga had a lot of hype going into them with their amazing backstory, but like I said, Overwatch sucks at paying anything off. So when we eventually did get to the point that we got the Baptiste and Mauga interactions, there was just nothing interesting going on over there. So all that build up that, oh my god, Baptiste and Mauga, they could have been lovers. There could have been something behind them. Mauga's kind of chasing after Baptiste. But now they just kind of, I don't know, tolerate one another's, like, whatever. Like, there's nothing interesting going on. Overwatch really sucks at doing payoffs. And I'm really worried how they're going to handle the future of the lore when it comes to this. Again, it's just my opinion. Brigitte is actually top 3 of the most balanced supports in the game right now in the lore, despite some encouragement from Ryan and Torbjorn in the end of one of the PvE cinematics. She's in no position to ever be a team leader. She has 0 years of actual dedicated combat and war experience where it matters. And yeah, I just think it is what it is. Illari, honestly, she's pretty cool. I think Illari by far narratively and gameplay-wise has been handled really well. Pylon is really annoying, but I understand that Pylon brings something a little bit different to the support class and allows for different things to happen. I think she's in a much better place where she is now. She can be annoying to play against, but I think Illari is just very cool. She's honestly just really cool. I just think she's awesome, right? Juno. Juno's ultimate is the fundamental reason that her entire kit has suffered to where she is now. Her primary fire and healing was fun to use, but then they made it super clunky and awkward to use, and then toned down the power in every other part of her kit. Her new movement has been completely guttered, and I don't understand that if the ultimate was that strong or the torpedoes was that strong, why don't you address those parts of the character and not like this other part of the character that's not strong, and now she just feels horrible to play. Kiriko, oh boy, this one's spicy. So I don't think Kiriko is that OP. I do agree that Suzu is still really annoying and it really sucks to play into Suzu, but Kiriko as a character is not even being seen that much in the meta. She is seen here and there, but I wouldn't necessarily argue that she's as OP as she was upon release. They've done a pretty good job of quote-unquote balancing her out, but I still think they could do better when it comes to Suzu and things like that. Lifeweaver is by far the worst design support, no debate. Lucio, cool character, but his character focus really should have been an arc and a rivalry with Symmetra. First of all, it would have done a lot for both of them, and the character arc should have eventually explored Symmetra, turning her back on 𝐓𝐿𝐼𝐊𝐿𝐿, realizing how 𝐓𝐿𝐼𝐊𝐿 are really bad people, coming over to Lucio's side, and the two of them taking down 𝐓𝐿𝐼𝐊𝐿 one way or the other. But again, this is impossible to pull off in this lore because that means the writing team has to actually do a payoff, and that's just not going to happen. To be honest with you, coming down to Mercy, Moira, and Zen, I don't really have a problem with them, and any hot takes. I think maybe Moira, I have a really spicy hot take that this character almost every 2 patches becomes easier and easier and easier to play and gets power crept even more and more. I really don't like that, and I just hope we could move away from that direction when it comes to the character. Overall, that's some of my hot takes, spicy takes. I don't know if I was maybe holding back a little bit. I don't know if I could have gone a bit deeper. Obviously, this was just done for funsies. None of it is meant to be taken overly seriously. My little dibs at the balance team or writing team, again, is just me playing into a character and not necessarily reflecting my actual feelings as a person. So before anybody goes absolutely crazy, remember that this is just for the video format and, just for the sake of entertainment. It's like playing a character. It's like watching WWE and watching a heel character, right? So the Abby character is kind of a heel character, right? Because he comes out over here and he starts talking all this shit. And it's like, oh my God, bro, why is Abby talking all this shit? So, but I could always approach this in a more professional manner in another video. But again, this is for spiciness, and I think we got enough spiciness across. So with that being said, what are your hot takes when it comes to Overwatch? I'd like to read them down below. And as you guys saw in the previous video, I actually respond to a handful of comments. So like I said, if you comment, I'm going to be looking over them, talking to you about it. With that being said, shout out to the patrons over here, and I will see you in the next video.